Hey guys! Today I want to talk with you about The Familiars, a historic fiction novel by Stacey Holz. This book was published in 2019 and in 2020 it won a Betty Trask Award. An interesting thing to point out is that The Familiars is loosely based on real-life events, aka Pendle Hill witch trials, as well as most of the characters in this novel are based on actual historical figures. As per usual, we will start this review with a short synopsis, then proceed to the non-spoiler review and wrap this video up with the spoilers. If you haven't read The Familiars yet, then do not worry, I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. The Familiars take us back to 1612, to northern England. In this novel, we get to follow a 17-year-old noblewoman named Fleetwood Shuttleworth. Fleetwood is pregnant, and unfortunately, all of her previous pregnancies ended in tragic miscarriages, making this one incredibly stressful and borderline life-threatening. However, one day, completely by chance, Fleetwood runs into a young woman named Alice Gray. Alice is a talented midwife, and soon enough, these two women create a bond, a friendship of sorts. And Fleetwood grows more and more sure that she and her baby will not be able to survive without the help of Alice. Unfortunately for them both, Alice Gray stands accused of witchcraft. Is there really more to Alice than meets the eye, or is the 17th century's obsession with witch hunt is actually just a hunt on women? So let me start this review by saying that I did enjoy this novel. It's a solid read. It's simple yet interesting. Not only that, but it's easy to read, the characters are complex, and the story at times can make your blood boil. That being said, I feel like being a bit nitpicky today, and therefore I also feel the need to point out that the beginning of this book felt rather slow, and the ending of the book felt very weak compared to the rest of the story. I would go as far as to say that the ending is the reason why I couldn't give this book a full 5 out of 5 stars rating. In addition to that, the book felt weirdly young adult. The writing style of Stacey Holz seemed very simplistic. Maybe it felt like this because The Familiars is the very first book written by this author, or maybe this is just the way Holz writes. That's a question I have no answer to, as The Familiars is the only book of hers that I have read to this date. Usually a simplistic way of writing wouldn't be something that I would point out or would be put off by. But in this particular case, the simplicity of the book was a little weird due to the fact that the novel actually discusses a variety of incredibly serious and painful topics. The Familiars contain it all. 17th century's marriage dynamics, the purpose of women of that time, a lack of women's rights, the tragedy of losing children, and the lack of agency one has over their own body. It touches upon such things as pedophilia, poverty, and what some people are willing to do in order to gain more power. This book is about self-hatred, betrayal, and lack of control over the things that are happening to you and around you. You could easily remove the whole witch trial subplot from this novel, and this novel would be just as interesting to read, because at the end of the day, The Familiars is simply a book about the life and the rights of the woman in 17th century's England. And yet, despite the book being so fully packed with such serious topics, at times it felt like the novel was written for a much younger audience, which also made me feel confused. The writing style reminded me of something that I would recommend, for example, for a 12-year-old to read. Yet the topics chosen in the novel felt like something a 12-year-old should not be reading about just yet. However, as I said before, this is just me being nitpicky. I enjoyed reading this book, and I would still very much recommend this book to anyone interested in historical fiction, and especially to the ones that find the stories about the lives and hardships of women fascinating to learn about. On this note, we will move to the spoiler review so we could talk about the plot and about the main issues I have with the ending of this novel a little more freely. If you haven't read The Familiars yet, now it's a great time for you to click off this video. So let's start the spoiler review by saying that I did not like Richard. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated feeling because if you try and look through 17th century's norms, Richard is not a bad man. I would even go as far as to say that he's actually a very decent man for the time. In addition to that, he could be considered to be a caring husband. Just from the memories Fleetwood shares with us, we see that Richard has always at least tried to take her feelings and needs into consideration. Even before Fleetwood moved to live with him, he made sure that she would have a space of her own in his house. He understood her struggles to fall asleep when it was too loud outside, and after they moved and Fleetwood couldn't sleep because it was too quiet now, we know that he would stay up with her and make noises to comfort Fleetwood. I know it's not much, but as a man of that time, he didn't have to try and take care of Fleetwood's emotional well-being. He didn't need to hide his affair. He didn't need to allow Fleetwood the freedom he allowed to go after the juries of the witch trials, and he didn't need to stand up for Alice in the court. He did those things because he truly cared about Fleetwood. Despite this being an arranged marriage, and despite Fleetwood being significantly younger than he, we are encouraged to see their marriage as a good one. But as a 21st century woman, I still could not force myself to like him, no matter how much I tried. In my eyes, Richard was still the man who pushed Fleetwood to try and have a child over and over again without basically any recovery time in between of the miscarriages. He was the man who did not really consider what these little tokens, these presents he was giving his unborn children, were doing to his wife's psychological and emotional stability. He was a man who implied that Fleetwood might be partially responsible for her miscarriages. He was still a man who fucked around and got his mistress pregnant at least twice while Fleetwood was killing herself, trying to give him a child. And he was still a man who took his friend's side over the side of his wife. Overall, the Familiars made me so infuriated over and over again. Anger was without a single doubt the most dominating emotion I felt while reading this book. I was angry that Fleetwood, being such a young woman, was pushed into this position where her desperation to have a child overpowered everything else in her life. I was angry that others blamed her for losing the babies. I was angry at Richard's dismissal of Fleetwood's feelings and refusal of sleeping in the same bed as her. I was angry how men don't really listen to women or care about what they have to say. And even when they listen in the same way as if they would be trying to indulge a silly child, and not as if they would actually take the things women say into consideration. I was angry for the way Fleetwood's mother treated her, and no, that half-assed apology and that explanation of why Fleetwood's mother did what she did not make me feel any less upset with her. I don't care how uncertain their life was after Fleetwood's father died. As far as I'm concerned, her mother should have remarried herself before she married Fleetwood off to a much older man when she was only 4 years old. And I was so angry that Richard, that piece of shit of a man, asked for a marriage license to marry his mistress before his own wife even actually died in childbirth. And yes, I know, in the end of the book we learned that the marriage license was not for him and Judith, but by the time we learned that, I have already spent a fair amount of the book hating Richard. And while Fleetwood did learn to forgive him, I am not in love with Richard the way she is, and therefore I just couldn't manage to force myself to really look beyond his flaws. Okay, now that I'm done ranting about Richard, let's take a moment to talk about the women and their role in this book. Or rather, about their role in the world Stacey Holmes describes, which is incredibly sad and frustrating. The role of Fleetwood and other noble women is to provide their husband with children, or at least one child. That's it. These women are not there to take care of the house. They have staff for that. They're not there to cook. They have chefs for that. They're not there to entertain or keep their husbands company. They're not even there to pleasure them. What for? The husbands can have as many mistresses as they want to take care of any physical needs. The wives are there to give birth. Period. After the child is born, they're not there to breastfeed them, they're not there to raise them or to educate them. The purpose of their whole life can be boiled down to 9 months of pregnancy and the time it actually takes to give birth. Outside of this short period of time, the noble women are completely unnecessary. And it's so insanely upsetting just how empty their existence is. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that motherhood is an empty existence. I'm saying that if your only reason for being alive is giving birth, not being a mother, but simply giving birth, then in the eyes of society of the time, you are nothing more than a replaceable means for breeding. And just in this novel, we can see how unhappy Fleetwood is. She knows what her role is, and she hates herself for not being able to give her husband a child, especially since she feels like she owes Richard her life for saving her from the first unsuccessful marriage. It's so hard to read about her practically killing herself, trying to carry out a pregnancy to fruition over and over again, not letting her body rest. We meet Fleetwood in the beginning of this book being pregnant, but also incredibly malnourished. When you think about it, it's actually a miracle that she manages to give birth this time around, taking into consideration just how much her body has gone through in such a short period of time. And Fleetwood knows that being a woman means getting the short end of the stick. That's why her saying that she wants 2 boys and no girls is understandable yet saddening to read. And yet we can argue that Fleetwood and other noblewomen live better lives than those women who are not married to the men in power. At least Fleetwood does not have to worry about the roof over her head or where her next meal will be coming from. For one reason or another, none of the women in this novel can actually be defined as having a good life. None of them are allowed to fight for themselves. None of them are allowed to set their own paths in life. Instead, all they can do is to observe the things that are happening around them and choose how to react to them in a way that it would benefit them most. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when we were first introduced to Judith, my very first instinct was to hate her, which I realize is an emotional response brought onto me by the fact that all this time I have been reading this book from Fleetwood's perspective, and seeing her hurt made me feel hurt as well. However, once I sat down and gave myself a moment to think about it, I realized that Judith is just in the same shitty situation as all the other women of the time. She as well doesn't have any agency over her own decisions. Even though we do not get any actual information on how Richard and Judith met or how they got together, I highly doubt that any of it was actually initiated by Judith or that any of it was done with a malicious intent of breaking up a marriage or taking over Fleetwood's place as Richard's wife. Taking into consideration everything I have read in this novel, I can't help but assume that it was Richard who picked Judith and who approached her, and Judith did what she was thought to do. She adapted to the situation and made the men in her life happy. I highly doubt that Judith dreamed about a life of a mistress, where she's being stashed away like an embarrassing secret, where she has no rights whatsoever, not for herself nor for her children. Honestly, by the end of the book, I couldn't help but feel so sorry for Judith. Now that Fleetwood survived and managed to give birth to 2 boys, Judith and her children are as good as forgotten. They ended up being discarded as a plan B, which turned out to be unnecessary. Alice, I guess, could be identified as one of the women in the Familiars who tried to diverge from norm and create her own path. She worked to earn money to be able to help to keep her family afloat. She left her father's house to go live with the man she loved, and she didn't even pursue marriage with him because all she really wanted was to be with him, married or not. And we can see how society treats her for trying to be different. She was fired from her job for helping a person in need. She was brutally betrayed by the man she loves. She was at least psychologically abused by said man and by her own father. And eventually she was accused of being a witch and almost sentenced to death. There's no way to win. You can try and abide by the societal norms of the time like Fleetwood or her mother and live an empty life that more often than not doesn't bring you happiness and takes away your free will, or you can try to step out of the path and live your life the way you want to, like Alice, and risk being shunned. And before we start wrapping up this review, I also wanted to quickly touch upon Janet Device, the girl who betrayed her family and claimed them to be witches. Now, it's rather easy to look at Janet as an evil child who caused immense harm to her family and to the woman who happened to be at the wrong time at the wrong place. Yet she's also nothing more than a child that is being manipulated by a grown-up man and promised a way out of extreme poverty. I personally think that Stacey Holz did an absolutely fantastic job writing Janet, as every time she showed up in the book, I could not help myself but feel creeped out by a child. Describing her, the author found this perfect balance where you as a reader understand what huge power this child is yielding and how much damage things she say could cause, while at the same time you understand that she is nothing more than a puppet in Roger's hands. And just in case you were wondering, the character of Janet Device is one of the characters in The Familiars who was based on a historical figure by the same name, and with a quick Google search you can read more about her and her life. One thing that I wanted to point out, however, was that Janet, the real Janet, ironically ended up being accused of witchcraft herself, 20 years after Pendle witch trials ended. All that being said, there is one multi-layered reason that made this book less memorable and less impactful than it could have been. And that's the ending of the book. There are two specific complaints that I have about this ending, so let's look at them together. First of all, I did not like it at all that the author basically confirmed to us that Alice is in fact actually a witch. For most of the book, we are giving the choice whether we want to believe that witches actually exist or whether we want to look at this all as a load of bullshit. People who have something to gain claim to be real. Even when we are given little snippets of something that might be supernatural, such as Alice draining Fleetwood's blood and then just basically stealing it, the fox sharing the same facial expressions as Alice, or the doll with a baby attached to her held together with the help of Fleetwood's hair. All of that could still be put to the side of weird, superstitious, but not actually magical. And then we got the birthmark on the baby in the exact same place where Fleetwood has a scar left behind by Alice. Now that is a very difficult coincidence to explain using common sense. So the most obvious conclusion is that Alice is indeed a witch. I hated that. I like that we could choose. I like the idea of men feeling so threatened by a woman that the only way they could fight against it was by inventing these ridiculous stories. We see that the women who are being accused of witchcraft are just intelligent women who understood herbs and medicine and human bodies better than some of the doctors of the time did. I did not need anything actually supernatural in this book to make it a great read for me. In my eyes, whether Alice or anyone else for that matter is a witch doesn't matter. Not really. We see that the witches are not the bad guys in this book. It's people like Roger and John Fold who are willing to kill innocents that are the real villains of the story. And secondly, the book's ending didn't match the tone of the actual book. Halfway through the book, I was completely convinced that the novel will end with Fleetwood dying in the childbirth, being on trial as a witch, or losing her baby. And while I didn't want any of that to happen, I just realistically couldn't see any other ending to the story that was being told. To this day, I'm shocked that Fleetwood was not at least accused of being a witch. Yes, she had an influential husband, but she was behaving way too bravely for a woman during massive witch trials. She not only openly supported women that were on trial for being witches, she visited said women in prison where she specifically asked to be left alone with them and then send them food and provisions. She ran around trying to collect information and bribe and threaten others to find anything that could help her free Alice. And she did all that with a massive dog by her side. I mean, I seriously do not understand why Roger didn't just whisper to some people that Fleetwood might actually be a witch. If he would have done that, then all of Roger's problems would have disappeared in a matter of days. In addition to that, as I have said before, it was a miracle that Fleetwood managed to give birth to a healthy child and survive the childbirth. We know that she had problems with that before. We know that in a matter of 4 years, she had at least 3 miscarriages and 4 pregnancies. We know that she is malnourished. We know that just during this last pregnancy, her life has gone upside down. The letter from the doctor, her husband's infidelity, the witch trials, all of that has been incredibly stressful. And while it is not believed that stress caused miscarriage, it doesn't help the pregnancy either. And in addition to that, she has been attacked and falling off her horse at least twice, as far as I remember. And yet, despite the whole scene of Fleetwood giving birth being very intense and dramatic, this book ends with happily ever after. Fleetwood and her child are both alive and well, while Alice is freed of all of the charges. And while it's always nice to get a happy ending, this particular happy ending felt out of place. The whole story had this gloomy atmosphere, and yet in the end everything turned into a fairy tale, where even Fleetwood's mother came to tell Fleetwood that she loves her. We get this complete happy ending where everything just falls perfectly into place. Fleetwood makes up with her mother and her husband, and their marriage is stronger than ever. She manages to give birth to 2 healthy boys, just as she always wanted, and she feels like her life is complete. We get sort of a confirmation that Alice is finally free to live her life the way she deems fit. We get Roger being somewhat punished for his arrogance, and we are essentially encouraged to forget that Richard still betrayed Fleetwood, that Judith still exists somewhere out there with Richard's child, or that women still do not have agency over their own lives. Anyhow, that's just my opinion. What about yours?